want to touch upon, the little more detail perhaps, is the challenge to secular, democratic and pluralistic India. I found that your mission statement talks about a pluralistic society. That's why it is already a pluralistic society. But the pluralism has to be respected. The diversities have to be respected. Nobody is more equal than other. The equality principle or the fairness doctrine has to be respected. It is in our Constitution. It's in various Supreme Court judgments. But in practice, do we honor it? That's a question that needs to be answered with an open mind, in a critical way. And I think this challenging question about it's said to be about the idea of India. What kind of society is India? What kind of civilization is India? And this challenging question has come to the fore. I don't want to name the name of any parties or even any organizations, but I only will talk about tendencies here. And we have what in India is known as communalism. Communalism as a political mobilization strategy, whether parties or organizations or leaders claiming to speak for the so-called majority or the minorities, both commit the sin of communalism. They militate against the Constitution, its basic values. And today, there are many attempts to dodge this question. And even, I think, the Supreme Court judgment on the Ayodhya issue has been criticized by serious lawyers and others. For example, Gautam Bhatia and various others. I'm not getting into that. But the idea that you are trying to undermine the secular foundations that are embedded in our Constitution, secular and democratic values that are embedded in our Constitution, I think this has to be a subject for discussion and as part of education. What does secularism mean? Secularism first means in my understanding, the equality principle or the fairness doctrine. Nobody is more equal than anybody else in society, whether you belong to the so-called majority community or to minority communities. There is fundamentalism and extremism militate against this principle. The Supreme Court in its Bommai judgment, I think, came out very clearly in a full-throated way in defense of secularism as an inalienable value of the Indian Constitution and said it is mandated by the Constitution. But today, in politics as well as in social life, this principle is largely honored in the breach, not in the observance. This is a fact of life, and unless in some way students, young people, young boys and girls come to face with this question, they cannot be good citizens in future. They have to find their own ways of resolving it. But there is no escaping the fact that this is a core basic value that they have to contend with. It's in the Constitution, it's part of our freedom struggle, and it's also part of our civilizational heritage. That there are, of course, there have been episodes, there have been chapters in our history where religious conflicts took place, when narrow-mindedness took over and so on, then and now. But by and large, historians like Romila Thapar, Irfan Habib, and various others have come to the assessment that, to the understanding that India did well because it respected pluralism, diversity, and the idea that people should thrive. It didn't quite believe over history that everyone is equal because the caste system was there and also other differences. But certainly that all people should thrive. They should have their opportunities. Let them do well. This idea informed our civilization. It underpinned our civilization. And that, I think, is a fact that needs to be respected today. Communalism, not so much as religious fundamentalism, but as a political mobilization strategy to win votes, to come to power, has made disturbing progress over the last 2 decades in particular. And we can talk about majority communalism and minority communalisms, and we have to have an even-handed approach to this. Secularism as the equality and fairness principle must be based on justice if it is to survive and flourish. That is often forgotten by people who think in a superficial manner on this subject. The unmet demand for justice in India has many dimensions: the constitutional, political, the social, the economic, gender, and so on. Discrimination and denial of elementary justice in any of these dimensions weakens and saps the practice of secularism. Revivalism, traditionalist attitudes to women, caste, and social hierarchy, all these work against secularism primarily by denying justice to the victim sections, the losers in the population. And I think this has, we have a major challenge before us, and unless we resolve this in an intelligent way, in a scientific way, in keeping with the basic values that are embedded in our Constitution, I think we are not going to do very well in the future. However, whatever you do in the field of space, and we can be proud of the achievements, we have nuclear weapons and so on, whatever, you have technological power, you have muscle, you have built up enormous strengths in certain areas of industry. You can call yourself a software superpower, or we used to do that. All this will not matter very much unless you get this basic thing right. And finally, the third issue I want to mention is freedom of speech and expression. This is important for all of us, for those of us who are in the news media and for anyone in the field of education. The life of the mind, freedom of expression is important. Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution guarantees freedom of speech and expression as a fundamental right. And Article 19(2) lays down the limitations, because no right can be absolute, and it lays down the limitations by stating that under eight heads, such as national security of the country, public order, and so on, contempt of court, defamation under these laws, or if state legislatures enact laws, then those limitations will apply. But these limitations should be reasonable. Today, a lot of this is simply bypassed or ignored, and intolerance has never been as severe, as acute, as intense as we face it in some parts of the country. The worst example would be lynchings that have taken place. Lynching, saying, cow slaughter, somebody is doing this, go and lynch the person. Or innocent women who are branded as child lifters, they have been lynched. And what makes it possible? What makes this speed of killing possible? WhatsApp. The technological transformation that has taken place. The message goes with lightning speed, and something that originates in one place, let us say in the south of India, can have a big impact, a deadly impact somewhere else in the northeast and so on. And this is a major problem that we have. There is also political intolerance. Many governments do not like criticism. That's of course natural. But what do you do about it is the question. And today, there are attempts using the various agencies, whether it's the CBI or the Enforcement Directorate or the income tax authorities or just the police, to go after people who raise their voice. In some cases, of course, they are culpable. They have committed offenses. But it is also used in a selective way to target those who are creating trouble in the eyes of those in power, whether they are in government, or it could be a company, or just a leader of a mafia, a local mafia group. There have been killings, there have been violent attacks, there has been toxic attacks, verbal abuse, and so on. And women are increasingly facing this problem in India, these attacks. So I think we have a lot of reason to worry about this. There are brave people who speak up, but I don't think we are doing enough to uphold what is guaranteed as a fundamental right in the Constitution. And I think in the midst of all this, you have the problem of what is called fake news, disinformation. Disinformation is a major problem in India. In addition to the physical attacks and pressures, in addition to the threats that come from political sources or those in power, you have the enormous problem, because the scale is staggering, of disinformation, whether it's trolling or just nasty comments on you on the internet, or whenever you post an idea, you're attacked immediately by a whole group, an army of trolls. I think that creates lots of difficulties in society. And just to give you an idea of the scale, so far as India is concerned, the scale of operation of these technological platforms. The number of internet users in India at the end of June 2019 was 560 million. That covers 40.9% of the population, as estimated by internetworldstats.com. This is still way below China's 854 million. That covers 61.2% of the population at the same time. So there's still a long way to go. So imagine the scale of the attack when this 40% or 41% reaches 60, 70, 80%, which is the norm for developed countries. There are countries where internet penetration is 90% of the population, and so on. So as this rises, the scale is not going to get easier. Riding off the back of this internet development, there has been an explosion of activity on a number of platforms. Facebook, more than 300 million users in India. WhatsApp, the figures I saw, 400 million monthly active users. Instagram, 155 million users. Google, we don't have the exact number, but hundreds of millions of search users. YouTube, 265 million monthly active users. Twitter usage, 30 million plus, and so on. So you have orchestrated disinformation on a scale that is unprecedented, and this is going to be a constant pressure point on freedom of speech and expression, because people get disheartened, people get intimidated, they get overawed, sometimes they get frightened, and there are psychological problems created by toxic disinformation unleashed on these millions of people, especially young people. And I think it is part of the responsibility of every school to educate their pupils, their students, on what to do about it. It's not an easy one, but you have to discuss it, because they are constantly exposed to it. If you keep it out of the schoolroom, the moment they leave the premises, they're going to face it. They're going to certainly face it at home, because many parents, particularly in small towns and rural areas, are not familiar with this technology. So the children have the whole field to themselves in this. They are exposed to things. We are not talking about an illiberal, censoring information for all of them, but we are talking about arming them with the awareness, the understanding that this is a great harm. The idea of online harms. There's a white paper put out in the United Kingdom by the government, which is up for discussion, called Online Harms, and what to do about it. What kind of regulatory mechanisms need to be developed to do this? If you do it in an unthinking way, you're going to curb free speech, freedom of speech and expression. But if you don't do anything, it's even worse, because the online harms are very significant. They unleash a huge amount of harm at the time of elections. They can cause risk and threats to human life and welfare and livelihoods. And this is, I think, a huge problem. I would also make a distinction between disinformation and misinformation. Disinformation is deliberate, it is motivated, and misinformation is not intentional. It happens all the time in the public arena. You get wrong information, but it is not motivated. It is not mischievous. It should be, of course, contained. It can also cause harm, but it is disinformation which is scaled up and weaponized that is the greatest threat, is one of the greatest threats to freedom of speech and expression and to happiness in society. These are some of the things that I think you have to talk about. I don't know how it will connect with the theme of from best practice to next practice, but perhaps creative ways can be found looking into the future about, you can't completely eliminate it, but you can contain it in a way that helps significantly. And I think this has to be part of the agenda of education. It always was. These issues were always, should have been part of education. You can't keep these issues away from the classroom. It won't work, and it's not good either. But today, more than ever, I think we need to discuss these openly, frankly, even fearlessly, so that people are armed with the understanding which will lead to the development of capabilities. I think I'll end on this note. It's not a complete analysis of these issues. It's not an adequate analysis of these issues, but it's the kind of issues that should be discussed. And this is, of course, illustrative. I took issues from the top of my mind, things that are important for me. You may have other issues, but by all means, discuss them and create enough time and space for discussing it. And if you discuss it in a relevant, engaging, and interesting way, I'm sure young people will respond splendidly to this. So thank you for this opportunity, and I wish your conference success.